Welcome to the Ellis Talker Show. If you enjoy our content, please like or subscribe.
Hi, welcome to the Ellis Talker Show. I'm DB LeBron. Do you have things you need to get done around the house? Maybe you have construction needs. Check out K&H Construction. Their local guy, Chris Helms, out of Waxahachie. He'll take care of you. Let him know DB LeBron sent you. Today, my very special guest and candidate for the newly created 504 District Court in Ellis County, Miss Cynthia Walker. How are you doing, ma'am?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for coming on. I do appreciate it. And like I've told every candidate that has ran, thank you for wanting to serve your community in these rough and tumble things that can be Ellis County politics. It's not easy to throw yourself into that. It's, it's a whole family affair when you throw yourself into that. And it's very difficult, but thank you for wanting to serve your community, ma'am.
I appreciate that.
So can you tell the people of Ellis County a little bit about you? What started you in law? And
Sure. So I grew up, I was born in Fort Worth, and I grew up right outside of Fort Worth in a small, older suburb called Richland Hills. It's in the mid-cities area. Was there for 18 years until I went to college at the University of Texas in Austin, and then I went to law school at Baylor Law School. What drew me to law probably started when I was 14 and I read To Kill a Mockingbird. That is sort of the book that a lot of young teenage kids read the first time they think, oh, and that was kind of me. But I never really thought that the problem that I had as a child, as a teenager, and probably as a young adult was I was very self-conscious and shy, and I never thought I could really get up and speak in front of people. And I thought, well, that's what lawyers do.
yeah, that's kind of
But
hard.
I wasn't. It is, I would see other people who seemed to have such an ability to do it and natural. And I was a good student, but I was, very self-conscious, I guess you could say.
Mhm.
And so I thought, well, that's probably not going to be what I do. But, I went to college, and then it seemed like I gravitated toward history classes and government. And I was interested in the Constitution. I remember I took a class on the Federalist Papers. I read almost every single one of them. That was part of this college class. And so I was more and more interested in it. And then also an event that affected me a great deal was the Oklahoma City bombing. So I think that was in 95. So that was toward the end of my college years and going into law school. And it was sort of this idea that law and I hated what happened, and it was like, kind of, what can I do?
Yeah.
I mean, it was sort of esoteric, and I didn't know because there were no lawyers in my family. So law school sort of seemed like what I knew about it was, and I'm dating myself, was probably LA Law and Night Court, those shows.
I was there.
But I just had this feeling that with what I did well, which was, sort of English and history and government, that maybe law school would be something, as opposed to, say, chemistry and math, which I'm not that great at.
No.
Maybe there was something in my future that would, that I would lead me into a good place. And then I went to law school at Baylor, and I tended to gravitate toward criminal law. I did an internship in McLennan County, which is in Waco. And I thought working in the DA's office there, I just thought, oh, you can really help people. When I was reading contracts and things like that in law school, and it's all important, but there was something about working in the DA's office that these are real people with real tragedies or real problems, and that you can make a difference. And this was sort of a very youthful, early 20-year-old,
Save the world.
It's kind of a save the world. That's exactly right. And so I thought, well, yes, I'm scared to death to speak in front of people, but I like the idea of doing this. So if I could get a job in the DA's office somewhere in Texas, that's what I would try to do. I grew up in North Texas. So I thought, well, let's look at the district attorney's offices in North Texas. And, I was going to apply at different places. And that's back before, you actually sent your resume on email. You dropped it.
You walked up like, hi, I got a
right
real school, yeah.
And Collin County, which I didn't even know where Collin County really was. It was McKinney and Plano, and it was much smaller than it is today.
Mm-hmm.
Much more like Ellis County is, except Plano was fairly big, but everything else, Frisco had one high school, McKinney had one high school. And I just wanted a job and they offered me one. And I thought I may never get another offer, so I'll go here, and I started my career in 2000 in the Collin County District Attorney's Office and started trying traffic tickets in JP court and then moved to misdemeanor DWIs and assaults. And before I knew it, I was trying felonies, and I was slowly learning the craft of being a trial lawyer, learning the proper way to do things in a courtroom, the ethical ways. And because Collin County was growing, you had more and more opportunities. I had some great mentors there, people who share their knowledge, and I just enjoyed it. It was not easy. Some of it was extraordinarily sad and trying, but kind of when I was younger, I felt like I was making a difference, and I was getting to work with law enforcement. Some great defense attorneys up there, just really good people. And I stayed for almost 20 years, from being a very young prosecutor in 20s. And then, but as we got closer to COVID, I had been there for 20 years. I was a supervisor. I was trying some very important cases. I'd been on Dateline and 48 Hours. And so some big cases up there. I just felt like that all this experience and expertise, that maybe I was kind of at where the furthest I could go in Collin County. And I was looking for a new something. I didn't know what it was. So I looked at different counties, and then I saw on a posting for a prosecutor website across the state of Texas that there was going to be a new district attorney in Ellis County who was looking for a first assistant. And her name was Ann Montgomery. And I didn't know Ann Montgomery. I'd never met her. I knew one person in the DA's office down here who was a friend of mine when we used to work in Collin County. And so I drove around Ellis County, because at first, before I applied, I thought, would I like to live down here? Because I didn't know.
Well, yeah,
drove
that's
all
important.
around. It is. I mean, it's, you're going to move, because I wasn't going to drive from McKinney and back every day. It's just too far. Mm-hmm. And I thought, boy, this looks a lot like Collin County did in 2000. There's a great deal of rural area, but the northern part is, you can tell the construction, and it's growing. And then I interviewed, and I said, okay, I'll drop my interview. Of course, I emailed it.
Yeah.
And Miss Montgomery thought that I would be a good fit. She needed somebody with a lot of criminal experience, and I'm board certified in criminal law. And so I came here as the first assistant. And of course, I didn't really know that many people. And it was really just sort of a leap of faith, because I was hoping that I, could make a difference and that people would like working with me here, but I didn't really know anybody. And then I just started doing my best and working with law enforcement and the different defense attorneys, and, started meeting people and started trying cases and helping teach the younger prosecutors the right way to be a prosecutor in the courtroom and in the office. And I did that for 4 years until Miss Montgomery, she ran for reelection, and then she lost her bid for reelection. So then I had a decision to make, because usually the first assistant goes with the DA. Mm-hmm. The new incoming typically brings in their own first assistant. That's normal.
Right.
And some people that I trusted said, Cindy, hey, we think we're going to get a new court, and it's going to be handling primarily felony criminal cases. And we think you'd be a really good fit. And the first thing I thought would, I never wanted to run for office.
Right.
And then I was like, I haven't really been down here that long. I don't know if people would think that it's proper for me, But I thought, well, I do. I mean, if it's felony criminal law, that is what I know. And so then I thought, okay, if you're going to really run for judge, you should get the other side, the other perspective. And so I decided to open my own practice last January, and I became a defense attorney. I have appointments and retain clients, because I thought it was important to, if you're really going to run for judge, to have that perspective on both sides. And that's what I've been doing since January 1st. That's what I'm currently doing. I'm currently running for judge, but I have a practice and I have clients, and it's really been eye-opening. And I've had such tremendous help from some of the local defense bar who have been, great to talk to with questions and things like that. So that's kind of my professional but that's how I got to Ellis County. I live here. I have lived here for over 5 years now. I love it. People are kind and have been, very
It's
friendly,
good
and
community, isn't it? It really
it
embraced
is.
me.
It is. I've really enjoyed it. It's sort of a just living here. You have the rural area, small town feel, but if you want to go see the Rangers or the Cowboys or have a fancy dinner in Dallas, it's about 40-45 minutes, and then you can come back.
Yeah,
You can have a little big city and then come back. So it's a nice fit. I really enjoy it.
it is very centrally located, which is why it's growing. But a
Yes.
greater part of your life, 25 years roughly. If my math is not great
Mhm.
either, that's why I didn't go into math. But it's somewhere around 25 years of prosecuting and doing that kind of job, serving.
Yes.
Can you think of a case that really affirmed what you were doing, what really said, you know what, Cynthia, this is where you need to be, and continue to serve on that side? I've been a career law enforcement officer
Mhm.
for 20 years, and I wouldn't trade that experience for the world. And I know that there was a case or something that really brings it back. Can you talk about that?
Sure. I mean, I've had over probably 200, almost 220 jury trials, and of course, probably about 10,000 criminal cases that I've worked on. I mean, but there are those that, stick out with you. Some end up in, I guess with criminal law, even when you win, you don't necessarily feel like raw. You know what I mean? Because sometimes it's just an awful tragedy that you're just bringing a certain amount of justice or peace to the victim or the people who remain, the victim's family members,
Right.
right? I can remember, a little girl. I won't get into great details, but
Yeah,
that
I
she had
understand.
been sexually assaulted for many years of growing up and abused, and it was really hard. She was going to have to testify, and a family member. It's the problem with sexual abuse involving children is that it's tied in with love, and that even though they may be abused for many years, but they still love the perpetrator. That's what makes it so hard. And she was, with working with her for many different days and getting to know her. And she was pretty young. She was probably about 10 or 11. And it started when she was much younger. But she was very brave, and she took the stand and she testified. And her main reason for doing it wasn't so much because of her, it's that she didn't want her little sister or another little girl to have to go through with it. And so that's one of the greatest things that I saw about working in criminal law is that you are sometimes a witness to incredible acts of bravery or strength among people. It really sort of opens your heart and makes you want to do your very best just to do your job as well as you can. But I remember that, and I've seen other children and other people over the years who really step up when they're scared. And so many times they do it not so much for them, but because they don't want somebody else to be hurt or to go through with it. Now that child is probably now in her late 20s or early 30s. Now that I think about it. But I just remember that the man ended up getting like a life sentence, and she did it, and then she goes off to back to school, elementary school. She spends a week with us, and then I don't really ever get to see her again. That image sticks with you all these years. And there's been other kids, other families that stay with me, And so it's one of those things that even when something goes bad for me, like my car breaks down or I have a bad day, it helps you sort of put in perspective, your bad day versus what is really a bad day. And so
Yes.
I guess that sort of sticks out with me.
Wow. Yeah, no, I mean, that is probably because I believe that, God puts us here to protect children. And
Uh-huh.
and it is just horrible, the evil that's in this world that decides that, a kid is what they want to inflict evil on. And that's just always been as many different types of evil as I've seen in this world, from war to prisons. And that's always been the one that, wow, it's always been a little extra. But
Uh-huh.
what what would you say guides your your
Sure. So my judicial philosophy is pretty much, I would say, is sort of a conservative principle that I don't believe a judge should be, in a sense, an activist. In the, it's like, okay, what is the result that I should see happen, and then figure out how to make it. That I think that's completely wrong. The law comes from Constitution or the legislature, the Texas legislature. And my job as a judge is to apply that law as strictly to what those words are as possible. And that's really what I believe when it comes to reading law and applying it. And to me, that's a conservative judicial philosophy. So that's part of it, is try to follow the law as it's written and not just do what Cindy wants. And I say Cindy a lot because
Mhm.
my family and friends a lot of times call me Cynthia, even though I'm Cindy, even though my real name is Cynthia.
Mm-hmm.
And also I would say accountability. I would say that that's probably sort of a conservative judicial philosophy, especially in criminal law, is that, you're accountable for your actions. That doesn't mean that everybody goes to prison for everything. I don't mean it that way, but it's just an idea that there's, you make a decision. If you have the mental capacity, and most people do, there are those who are certainly sick or infirm and can't, but vast majority of people have the mental capacity, and they make a decision. And they make a decision to do this act or commit this crime, and that there's some accountability for that, and there's consequences. And obviously, depending on what the offense is, if it's proven beyond a reasonable doubt, I believe that there should be accountability for that. And sometimes that can take a lot of different ways. That can be prison, that can be a life sentence, that can be something, a fine, depending on what it is, or it could be probation. But there's a whole range of what can be when you talk about being accountable.
Let
And then
me
fine,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. I was
No.
just saying, finally, I just say, judicial philosophy. So that's kind of like the way of looking at a case. But I also believe in being a fiscal conservative operating a courtroom. You have to remember that you're a public servant and these are tax dollars. And so the decisions that you make in how you structure your day, and, whether you take the bench at 8 or 9 or 10:30, it's things like that, because people are waiting. And if you delay, if you, in a sense, drag your feet,
Yeah.
then there are people sitting in jail. That affects the sheriff's office, the jail. It affects the clerk's office. We're all intertwined. And so
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that you're just all about the money. I mean, the people's constitutional rights and the right to trial, you have to, weigh that and balance that, but also think of your fiscal responsibilities as a public servant, as a judge. So there's lots of different things that go into being a good judge.
You know that the law is black and white. When you read it, it's black and
Mhm.
white, but life is gray. Life is
Yes.
full of many shades of gray. How do you deal with that if you're encountered with it in the courtroom? I'm sure in your experience, both on the defense and prosecution, you've seen this. So how
Mhm.
would you deal with it, if you were sitting on a bench?
Well, so if you're talking just shades of gray, factual, it's like I can give you an example that happened many years ago, it's like a 10-year-old was killed by a drunk driver on New Year's, or like early New Year's Day or late New Year's Eve. Obviously innocent. She was just in her grandparents' car, and a drunk driver hit her. And so the maximum amount of punishment that on that type of case is 20 years. And some people would automatically think this is a child, innocent, 20 years. But then we found out that the person who hit her was a veteran, had served in like 4 tours in Iraq, had no criminal history, was suffering from PTSD, and was, that doesn't make it right, but it's just, you know what I mean? When you talk about shades of gray, it's like you hear one thing and then you hear another, but and so it's not always easy. It's like, where do you bounce? Some people would still say, 20 years. And some people would say, but wait, when I used to go talk at high schools and junior highs or middle schools, I would use that example because it's a true example. The man ended up pleading years ago and took 10 years with the family of the little girl, saying that was okay. I just remember that's probably 10, 12 years ago. But that example always sticks out to me, how immediately you think, And it was awful. It was tremendously awful. But at the same time, it was one of those things that, you weigh the person who's charged with the crime. And so you really have to look at everything, the full picture. And I don't know if I was a judge and if I had that opportunity, I'm not saying what I would have done. As a prosecutor, we ended up, I remember that case pled and took 10 years. And a lot of that was also with the family's blessing, I guess you could say, because a trial is a hard thing for people to go through.
It is.
So it is. And so, and that's always, anytime you go to trial, there's a risk for both sides. You just never know, but that's one of those situations that sort of jumps out at me. But when you talk about shades of gray, some people look at them and they say, no shade of gray. I know what I would have done. That's 20 years. And some people would have, felt differently. But you see that a lot in criminal law.
Yeah.
About, you think in your mind, it's like if somebody was charged with murder, 99 years. And then when you start to hear different facts, then that same juror might feel differently. And so that's one of the things we always talk about when we're in jury duty. We ask people to keep an open mind. Just don't prejudge the case. And that's really what a judge is supposed to do.
It's real easy to do.
What'd you say?
It's real easy to do. I mean,
very easy.
So.
Very easy. I'll give you an example. So if you said, okay, what should somebody who murders his wife get? If I just say that, most people would be like, well, throw the book at him, right? And that makes
Give
sense.
him the chair. Yeah.
Because you have an idea of what, and if I say a man murdered his wife, you probably have an idea what that is. But let's say you had a man who, most people are not still alive anymore, but let's say you had a World War II veteran. So he's in his 90s. And his wife is terminally ill, and he's never committed a crime in his life. He was a great citizen, and his wife is in pain, and he ends her life. Now, under Texas law, if he intentionally does that, that's murder. And the range of punishment is 5 to 99 years. But you may feel differently as a juror that maybe that's not a life sentence. I'm not saying you would, but some people might feel differently. That's what I mean by keeping it open. You just never know what the facts are going to be.
Yeah.
In a case. And that's what jurors have to do. And that's what judges have to do.
Right.
Is to keep an open mind. Don't prejudge a case. And I'm not saying that I would, I might be the 99, that might be appropriate, but it's just, those are the types of things that you have to remind yourself to keep an open mind to all the facts and let those facts come out and then make your decision. It's a really important thing for both jurors when you have jury duty, but also judges.
Yeah. Well, as someone who's I mentor in the Veterans Court in Ellis County, and it's something that I love that my brothers and sisters in arms, they have to work for it, but they got an opportunity to, get these things fixed. And I love that. I love that our county has that, and that they have that opportunity to do that. But that's one of those things where, they're allowed to do that. And because they didn't, the way I look at it is they didn't lose their honor, they lost their way. And, some things can be redeemed. But, and also in my own personal experience, if it wasn't for Judge Thomas Jones taking, taking a little bit of a different touch with a troubled gang member, I would never have joined the Navy and changed my life completely. And,
right.
So there's ways that, you could influence in that. But what does justice mean to you, and how would you apply it if you were a judge?
So for a judge, a judge is not supposed to take a side. Right. So even though in your heart, you might even be like, oh, I would love for this side to win, or just because that seems like the right thing to do. Your role as a judge is not to help a side, even if you want that side to win, for example. Justice in a context for a judge, in my view, is that you're creating a courtroom that is fair, that's open, that the attorneys know that the rule of law will be followed, and that the rules of evidence, the rules, code of criminal procedure and the penal code, and then you're applying it fairly and correctly. And that way the parties know that they have a fair shot, and that the rule of law will be applied equally to both parties. And then when that happens, even if your side loses, that it wasn't because of the judge. I think sometimes if we think about sporting events, it's maybe you watch the Super Bowl and your side lost. Well, if your side lost because the other side was better, if they just had a better team, you're like, it's annoying, but you're like, oh, the other side was better. But if it was because the referee made a bad call, right? Like if they called pass interference and it wasn't that, and then that will drive you crazy. And that's why, whether it's baseball, and that's why we have all these video replays and stuff, because we're trying to get it right. It's kind of that way in a courtroom too. If the parties, if both sides feel that things were fair, the rules of law were applied, and the judge did a good job, then even if your side loses, then you say, well, the jury just, that's what they felt. But if the judge makes a mistake and lets in some evidence or keeps something out that should have been in front of the jury, then one, if the state loses, that's just it. Because the state can't appeal because of double jeopardy. So a judge can make a decision where an injustice could occur, and a side who should have won or probably would have won doesn't win because that jury never heard a certain piece of evidence, or vice versa. They heard something that they weren't supposed to hear. And to me, I haven't seen it that often, but there have been occasions throughout my career where a judge making a mistake completely affected the case and justice was not served. In a sense, like I can remember in my head a child on a case that a jury didn't hear some evidence, which I think would have helped the state's case and would have, in a sense, I think made the jury feel that the child was telling the truth if they had heard some other things. And they should have. The judge, quite honestly, was wrong. And that's why, to me, it's so important. Criminal law is not easy. No area of law is easy. It's just that, most of lawyers, much like doctors, you start out of law school and then you start to specialize. Because if you need heart surgery, you're probably going to go to a cardiologist. If you're, if you have, I'm trying to think, internal medicine, whatever it is, I'm talking about. You're going to have a baby, you're going to go to a certain doctor. It's that way with law too. I imagine that if you need to get or having a divorce, you're going to go to a family law lawyer who's an expert in child custody, family law, divorce. Probably not going to go to a defense attorney. I would totally get that, or a prosecutor. And if you're charged with a crime, likely you want the best defense attorney you can get. Right. And if you are a victim of a crime, or you are a family member of a victim, you want the best prosecutor. And so in my mind, if you would feel that way, if you're going to spend your money and you want to hire the best attorney that you can, seems like you'd want the same thing for a judge. You'd want if you're going to go in front of a judge and it's going to be criminal law, you'd want that judge to know the most law and be an expert in that area. I would not have run for judge if it was going to be, say, a civil business type court, because that is not my area of expertise.
And it's a felony court. It is a felony court. And this is what you've spent a greater part of your life in. So like, if you were elected judge, what of that would you bring to this court? How would you improve efficiencies, or just be able to, some of the things that maybe you learned throughout the year, that maybe years that you could make that court better if you were elected? So
first of all, I have been in probably 200 to 300 different judges over my career. And I was assigned into different courts, and I'd watch different judges and how they structure their dockets. And so when we're talking about efficiency, I actually saw what works and what doesn't in a criminal law aspect. Who moves their docket quickly, which dockets just stagnate, and cases just sit there for 2 to 3 years and they don't, what are the sort of traits? And a lot of this is just, it's maybe simple things. It's just, having a certain type of pass slip, or forcing attorneys after, 2 to 3 months, that if they're going to pass the case again, they've got to come up and see the judge. It's little things, but it's kind of like the judge is, keeping control of their courtroom and making sure cases don't languish. And, attorneys are humans as well, and there's human nature. And sometimes I'll get to that in a month or something like that. It's not that people are bad, it's just human nature. And then, everybody kind of does it. And then before long, you've got a docket that there's cases 2 to 3 years old. And that's not what we want, because then you have people sitting in jail. And so some of that is just over the years, seeing what works in a docket and what doesn't. And so those things that I've seen and worked on, those are the types of things that I would implement. So that's just a structural efficiency type issue. And then, of course, in a criminal law, it's just, with 10,000 cases and having years of continuing legal education in criminal law. So if something comes up in a court case, I see it and I go, I know what that is. I know that is a Fourth Amendment issue. I don't have to research it. It's just at this point in my career, it's like boom, boom, boom. I'm sure there are people in different professions. You do it for 20 years or so. Maybe you're a teacher or maybe you're a coach. You see it. You say, oh, I've seen that before. You can jump on it. You don't have to, it's very different than my first year or second year of practicing law. Now I can't, if I was sitting in a family law court as a divorce, I would be starting, in a sense, kind of from the beginning. I would work really hard, but I don't have those 20, 25 years of going, oh, I know what that is. I know what that is. I do with criminal law. I mean, I've seen so much of it over the years. And so it's a nice feeling, because it kind of, you feel a little bit, at this point, you're an expert in your area. And it doesn't mean that you still don't learn, and you still train and you do your education, your classes, but you're so much further ahead than you are when you're first starting out. And so it's a nice feeling to have. And that's the reason why I thought, maybe if I ran for this bench, I could really give back some of the expertise and experience, because that's really the only reason.
Right. Yeah.
I didn't dream to let's campaign.
Who does this for fun? Yeah, let me
Right.
go ahead and just, let me go run for office.
Right.
I could keep you on all night, because there's just so many things that we could talk about. I want to go ahead and go through about a couple more things before I let you go ahead and speak to the voters of Ellis County. One of the jobs that you're going to be doing if you're elected judge is signing on warrants. You're going to, and what is going to be your philosophy for protecting, doing the job and protecting the constitutional rights of those people when they approach you with a warrant? Hey, I need this warrant.
So it's a good question. And basically, is you just follow the law. You start with the Constitution of the United States, and there has been 200 years of litigation and case law and training. And I have books, somewhere around here, probably behind me, of search warrants. Just books regarding writing search warrants and the legal issues in search warrants. And so for years as a prosecutor, I actually taught police officers how to do it, write it. Because this is what happens. If for some reason a judge just signs a search warrant and it's not legally valid, eventually a higher court will read that and go, that's not good. The bad thing, though, for the police department is if they get a judge who signs a search warrant and it shouldn't have been signed, and then they go search a house, find drugs, find whatever it is, when they come to court, another judge is going to look at that and go, oh, that's not valid under the law. And then all that evidence that they found goes away. A jury never gets to hear about it. That's what we call suppression, a motion to suppress, exclusion of the evidence. And so as a judge, your job is to make sure that the warrant that comes to you that is valid, that it is constitutional. And that's how you protect our individual rights. If you follow the law and all the case law throughout the years, and you're staying up on it, and okay, and it's always evolving, because 20 years ago we didn't have cell phones.
Right.
There was no. But now we do. And, and I've got mine right here, and there's a whole lot of information on there. So if a police officer wants to search my cell phone, what are they going to have to write to have a valid search warrant? Because there has to be probable cause that there's some information on that cell phone that's going to lead to an investigation of a particular offense or evidence of a crime that's being committed. And so that's evolving. We have, I don't know if you've heard about geofences.
Yes.
Yes. So that's an area. I mean,
There's a
there's
whole new
so
world.
much, AI coming. So there's a lot that's coming. And so you start with this document that was written in 91, and you're and you're looking at the words, but you're having to apply it to technology that is moving so quickly. So it's important to understand search and seizure law and be aware of the technology and thinking on how that applies. Because yes, if we say no, the police never can look at any of this, but you got to realize that the bad guys are. I mean, they're using cell phones. There's quite a few.
Yes.
There's criminal enterprises. So it is this balance between our, our privacy rights. Do we have a reasonable expectation of privacy? Does the Fourth Amendment give us that? Or is this a legitimate, government concern?
Right.
And that's what you do as a judge. You're trying to look at it from being a neutral magistrate, not picking a side, but going, what is the law? And has this police officer met those requirements? If they haven't, you don't sign it. You send it back and say, you got to do better.
Right.
And then they have to do better, or there is no search.
I
And that's
imagine
just the
that
way it goes.
I imagine those would come, sometimes they come a little more broad and you would have to tailor them a little more. But like you said, it's brave new world.
So as a judge, it's not really your duty to say to the police officer, let me fix this for you. I mean, you may say, it's not enough, or, you're going to have to be more specific. But as a judge, I'm not going to sit down there. So as a prosecutor, that's what I would do. If a police officer came to me and said, I would review it, and I go, this won't work. You need to be more specific here and here and here. And that was part of my job, because I'm supposed to be the legal criminal expert. And while there are lots of police officers who are more than qualified, they don't necessarily need an attorney to help them. But sometimes they would just say, hey, can you just check? But that would be my role as a prosecutor. And in the DA's office, I would help them say, hey, you might want to add more here and here and here. And then they would go and do it. But as a judge, you're not supposed to really be picking a side and helping a side. You basically look at it and go, it's not there. You probably need to be more specific here and be very general. And then they have to go, and maybe they then call the DA's office. But that's really because you're not helping a side. You're just supposed to look at it and go, does this meet the law or does it not?
Yeah. And all that stuff is so tricky. I mean, there's a reason why God made me a podcaster and not an attorney. Boy, that stuff is deep. So last question I'm going to ask you before I have you close out is on bonds. There's been discussions about people issuing inappropriate bonds. There were cases that, maybe warranted a bond that probably would have kept the community safe, because, bonds are, I believe, and I don't understand the law, but I believe that bonds are set in, you're protecting law, but you're also protecting the rights of the accused. So how will you approach bonds on when you're working through those?
So part of it is that the law gives you some guidelines on what to think about with a bond. So you start off and go, okay, when you're setting a bond as a judge, you remember that somebody is charged with the crime, but they haven't been convicted. So they're still proven, they're innocent until proven guilty. So you're in a sense taking a person who's charged, but there has been no jury trial. There has been no finding of guilt. And so you start with that. And at that point, the rules basically say that bond is not used in a sense to oppress or to convict. It is designed so the person will come back to court. That is the ultimate thing, is that if we put a bond on somebody and they're in jail, and so they bond out, we want to make sure that they come back to court. That's the first thing. The second thing is we want to make sure that if they are released into the community, that they're safe, we're safe, no more violence occurs, so that's another thing to think about. And so in one sense, you could say, well, we could always make the community safe. We'll always make a bond that's so high that no one could ever make it, right?
Right.
But in a sense, The third thing that you're supposed to think about is you also consider the person's ability to pay, because if not, then the only people who get to be out are wealthy, rich people, and poor people would always have to stay in jail, right? And so you have to consider
thing.
that as well, and so there's all these different things that you have to think about, the criminal history of a person, because, the nature of the charge. You may feel differently if somebody is charged with murder versus somebody who's charged with shoplifting, right? I mean, it's what bond you're going to have, because somebody who is looking at, say, a murder charge and looking at a life sentence, you may feel as a judge that is somebody might have a more of an incentive to flee than somebody who's looking at their first time shoplifting, thinking that, well, maybe I'll get probation. If I'm not saying this would happen, but you understand these are sort of the things that you think about. And so that's why you see differences in bonds. And I think a lot of it makes sense to even the general public. They would probably expect higher bonds on more serious cases, but that's part of it. And those are the types of things you think about. So it's a balance where the safety of the community, safety of the victim, safety of the police, for example, officers, you consider that, but you also have to remember that this is a person who has not been convicted and they're innocent until proven guilty. And so then you have to think about their ability and also their background. What are their ties to the community? Do they have any criminal history? Do they have any history of fleeing? For example, like if they've been charged before, did they not show up for court? Those are all the types of things that you think about. Yeah. And then you sort of you consider all that, and then you make a decision on what the right amount is. And you can also put conditions. So you could put a bond amount, and you could say, but if you're released, you have to have a electronic leg monitor, for example, so we know your location. Or you can put a curfew, or you can have somebody who's drug tested, or sort of a protective order where, you're not allowed to go within 500 feet of the alleged victim. So there's different things you can do, but ultimately the person hasn't been found guilty yet. So you have to keep that in mind. So there's a lot that goes into it, but ultimately that's the role. That's why it's important for a judge to think about those things and to keep safety of the community, victims, but also thinking about and remembering that this is a person who has not been found guilty yet.
Yeah. I mean, I guess when I ask that question, I think about like some of those cases, maybe back east, where the guy has a rap sheet the size of Texas, and the judge let him out on some really small bond, or let him put him on bond on another one, and the guy went out and killed somebody, and it's like, are you serious? And I guess those, and I know that's more extreme, Cynthia, but it's just, I guess that would be something that the public sees and wonders.
Yes.
How
I will say that, and you're right. For the most part, though, especially in Ellis County, we don't have that sort of reputation. We're fairly conservative. You could say a reputation of being fairly tough with bonds. I know, even coming from Collin County, when I first got here, I was like, "Wow, these are some high bonds," And I was coming from a conservative county, and I was like, "Oh wow, look at this!"
Yeah.
So, I don't think the public really has to worry too much about Ellis County judges overall, just what I've seen. Mm-hmm. But it's a fair to think about that, because you do hear that. I think the Texas legislature made some changes recently because of what they had seen, say, in Harris County, Houston, and that they felt that there were people who were getting charged with very serious crimes that were getting out on what's called a PR bond, which means you don't even have to put any money down.
Right.
And so
not good, right.
And so they put more restrictions on that. But to be honest, that sort of, at least from what I knew from practicing in criminal law, that was sort of relegated to a small number of counties. And I can tell you that Ellis County does not have that reputation.
Yeah, this is not
at all.
So, well, this is the part where I shut up and I let you talk directly to the people of Ellis County. This is your chance to talk to them.
Okay. Well, hi, people of Ellis County. I am running for the 504th District Court. I decided to do this because I knew that this was going to be a felony criminal court. And that is what I have for 26 years now, that has been my expertise. I know it really well. I also know that when you have a judge who is not quite honestly, is not as knowledgeable on the bench in criminal law, bad things can happen. Wrong rulings occur. Justice sometimes doesn't get served. I don't like that when I'm an attorney, whether I'm a prosecutor or a defense attorney. If injustice happens because the judge does something wrong, not intentionally, but just makes a mistake, that's not a good thing. And to me, you want the very best, most qualified person on the bench, especially, you may one day be a victim. You may have somebody you care about who's a victim, or you may have somebody you care about who is charged with crime. And you want the very best people, much like if you were having to go into surgery, you want the very best doctor. And when it comes to criminal law, there's no doubt in my mind that that's me for this particular court. My opponent is a good man, but he is not a criminal attorney. I don't think he's had even one criminal case, and I've handled about 10,000. If it was a different type of court, I wouldn't be running for it. But it's because I really feel that I have the expertise and experience that can make a difference. I've been a public servant for 25 to 26 years in my career. It matters to me. I care about what I do and the people who I interact with, whether I'm helping victims as a prosecutor or representing people charged with crimes. I care about this area of the law, and it's what I've devoted my professional career to. And I think I could really make a good difference, in Ellis County. And it's something that I don't think people have to worry about me on the bench. And I think eventually, once they saw me, they'd be proud that I'm on the bench, and that I'm, a citizen, and that somebody that they can feel confident that I'll do the right thing. And so that's why I'd like your vote. I'd like to serve Ellis County in this capacity. I'm the most qualified, and I'd appreciate it if everybody considered voting for me.
Early voting starts, what, the 17th? It's coming up.
The 17th, that's right.
Coming up. We are in the home stretch. Thanks again for coming on, ma'am. Can you stick around after the show real quick?